Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eggs. Today's guest is Jennifer Peak. Jennifer is the founder of Peak Advisory Group, which provides strategic financial services for mergers and acquisition process of small to mid-sized companies, as well as outsourced CFO services for an exclusive group of clients. Peak Advisory Group specializes in business valuations, financial due diligence, including quality of earnings reviews, information memorandums, and strategic projects ranging from outsourced CFO and controller services to forensic accounting and process development for more timely and actionable financial information. Here to teach us a thing or two about financial literacy, welcome our guest, Jennifer Peak.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you guys?
Pretty good. Thank you for making the time for us. This is something I sorely need help with.
Yeah, no, it was funny. I was just making a joke with Mike earlier because I had just taken a consolidation loan to pay down a couple like rogue credit cards and get the interest rates down and all this stuff. And I was like, you know what? I should have waited until we talked to Jennifer before I did that because now she's just going to come on and tell me how stupid I am for having gone that route. So I will say the interest rates are better and it will be paid off much quicker. So I think it's better, but I don't know.
Then that's better. I think that's a much better deal.
It seems like a win. Well, cool. So Jennifer, let's go ahead and just kind of kick things off at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what we're doing here.
So, geographically born and bred in the Midwest, still live here in Kansas City. So spent my career and my life here. Started out in public accounting. So more, did my tour of duty on the audit side, and then went to work for a large corporation. A lot of the experience that I got at that large corporation was on mergers and acquisitions of all different sizes and on both sides. So when I left and started my own company, that was really the part of the work that I had done there that I focused on. I really like the deal making and the project focus of the work that we do. The marriage of that corporate experience with my audit experience is that the firm that I worked for when I was in accounting really focused on those small to mid-sized firms, a lot of family-owned businesses. So it's taking that expertise from the big corporation and working with small and mid-sized businesses.
That's awesome. Because I'm sure that's, something that small and mid-sized businesses don't deal with all the time is the exit plan and how to get out. And having someone that knows what they're doing and is willing to work with them makes a big difference, I'm sure.
Yeah. And it's, the reality of it is for those companies, those small to mid-sized companies and those business owners, this is a once in a lifetime thing, right? They're not going to do it over and over again. There are exceptions.
They've been building the business the whole time.
Right.
And then the exit strategy, they've never dealt with it before.
Yep.
Well, and to your point, not everybody gets a dozen exits, a lot of times it is just the one, so it's not something you're probably going to have the opportunity to, develop the skills at or be that good at. So, to have a resource like you would be great. I also imagine a lot of small businesses anyway, probably get started not thinking with the end in mind, they've jumped onto a skill or a trade they have, or, leveraging something they've learned somewhere along the way. And they're not even necessarily thinking about the business aspects or the longer term implications. It's more the immediate, I know how to do X, so I'll sell X. That kind of
Absolutely. And they generally decide to exit quickly, for lack of a better way to put it. They don't think 5 years from now, 3 years from now. Sometimes those are really good life events. Sometimes there's not great life events. Sometimes they just get tired.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense, especially if you've been in, a line of work for 62 years and you're looking at your 63rd birthday, it might be time to call it a wrap. And so I understand that. And I suppose by the time they think, just like everything else, right? We always kind of procrastinate to the last minute. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they're not planning the exit for 5 years up to the retirement. Like, it's just like, oh God, okay, I'm done. We got to wrap this up.
Right. Right.
So I'm sure you run into that quite a bit. So speaking of exits, though, so one of the things I guess that you would help somebody do when they're trying to formulate an exit is figure out sort of the value of their business and having some understanding of what they've got. I think a lot of times for a lot of people, especially smaller and more closely held companies, they may not dig deep on what the value of something really is. You know, they might be able to look at sort of economic figures. How much did we make this year versus last year? That kind of thing. But when you actually get down to valuing a business and figuring out what it's worth for resale or for, you know, liquidation or whatever, I imagine there are a lot of things that are commonly overlooked. So can you maybe talk to the, you know, what sort of maybe, I don't know, top 3, top 5 things that business owners ought to be thinking about when they're trying to wind down or when they're starting to look at evaluation?
Yeah,
Sure.
I didn't even know that there was a title as a CVA, Certified Value Analyst. So that's new to me. Thank you for informing me. But
No problem.
yeah, go ahead and tell us about it, because it's very intriguing to me.
Sure. So there's, you know, first and foremost, the most valuations look at what kind of cash flow is the business generating. And what I mean by cash flow is really, it's, you know, it's your net profit before any taxes that the company would be paying. And the reason, there's lots of reasons that's important, but one of the biggest reasons that's important is because that cash flow is likely going to be needed by the new owner to pay the loan that the new owner is going to take out to buy your company.
That makes sense.
And, you know, if you've had your company for 25 years, you may not have any debt on it. So making a loan payment isn't first and foremost in your mind. But that's certainly something that a new owner or potential buyer and their bank are going to be looking at. So there's definitely, that's a big component of both valuation and the ability to get the transaction across the finish line, not just to get somebody to agree to buy it.
Sure.
And so then there are the elements that go into that profit. One of them is, you know, the owners might be paying themselves a lot of money because they can, and why not? There's opportunities to adjust expenses in the valuation process for things that aren't going to be true going forward.
So payroll, for example.
Payroll is a really good example of that. If the owners are running their house cleaning service or their car payments or other non-company expenses through the company, which is not uncommon, those won't belong to the company after the fact. So you just want to make sure that you're adjusting for those and that they're easily identifiable. There's a lot of you need to be able to prove it to be able to add it back.
Sure.
So there's some of that.
So assets, like business assets, because that's kind of where my business sits, is I have a lot of assets as far as equipment and stuff that can depreciate over time. How would you go about adding that into the equation?
So there's a couple of different ways that valuation looks at companies that have a lot of assets. And the first one is those assets are really used to generate the revenue that the company is earning.
Sure.
So there's that component. Then there's the asset value itself. And the way that valuation tends to look at it is generally from a replacement value perspective, which is not necessarily, I'm going to go buy a brand new one, but it's also not necessarily, if I put this thing on the auction block, what am I going to get for it? Yeah. Right? It's I've got to have a reliable piece of equipment. What do I think the replacement cost would be to get something that's about like what I've got? The converse element to asset heavy companies is if potentially the assets have a lot of deferred maintenance. So a new owner would have to spend a lot of money to kind of get them back into working condition. So there's two sides to the equation. The valuation can attribute more of the cash flow to the hard assets, or you can look at them as two definitive groups and say, here's the true value of the cash flow, here's the value of the assets, then I'm going to add them together.
Okay. So the assets are very tangible, but something like a brand or name recognition isn't. Does that take a play into the evaluation of the business as well?
It doesn't play, well, it plays a little bit into the valuation. And here's, I would liken that to let's say that you're not going to carve off the intellectual property, that it really has to be sold as a cohesive unit. I would liken brand recognition to some of the other elements that improve valuation. Things like recurring revenue, long-term contracted revenue, any sort of long-term contracts that you have with vendors that ensure a certain type of pricing, particularly if you're in some sort of construction or manufacturing industry.
Sure.
Those are elements that point to sustained economic results and give you a lot more confidence in the future results. And that improves the valuation through a mechanism called the discount rate. But leaving the math out of it for a moment, all of those things add to the stability and the sustainability of the company's results, and therefore you get a higher valuation.
Interesting. Okay.
When you're doing evaluation, though, I imagine that one component, it just popped into my head when Mike was talking about sort of the intangibles, like a brand value. How do you deal with the emotional part of the business owner who owns the business, who may think their business is worth more than it is because they love it? But when you actually get down to the brass tacks of what something costs, I imagine there's sometimes some disparity between what they think it ought to be worth and what it actually is worth.
That never happens. that happens all the time. And there's certainly the emotional component to it. The other element of it, I like to call it the sweat equity component, right? It's I've worked so hard for all these years, it should be worth more than that. Mm-hmm. And the conversation then generally comes back to, I completely understand why you say that, and here's what your bottom line is, and you've got to realize that somebody's going to have to make a loan payment with that. And there's a lot of things that the company has provided to you, Mr. Owner or Miss Owner, over the course of the business, right? Hopefully you've taken a really good paycheck, right? You've earned elements of your valuation as you've gone along. So your big bang exit may be not what you thought it was going to be, but you've had 20 years of six-figure paychecks.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I suppose too, that could be part of the structure of the closing on the thing too, is, what is the, do you stay on for a year as a consultant? Right. Do you, receive some kind of buyout or, some sort of something at the end? So I suppose all of that's open to negotiation. So,
absolutely.
But yeah, no, I'm just thinking of the person that goes into, the auto garage and then insists that whatever they have to pay for that, no way could it be worth that. In my head, absolutely. I think it's this, but I don't really have any reason to think that. It's just what I think. So.
Yeah. The other thing that often happens in that kind of discussion is we have business owners that can see opportunity that they haven't taken advantage of. For a variety of reasons. Some of it's because they're too busy. They think it would take too much work. It would require some additional investment, just some things like that they're ready to move on. And so they see these opportunities that a future owner could take advantage of. And if that future owner took advantage of those and did all that work, then the company would be worth a lot more. And the current owner wants to be paid for that.
Oh, yeah. See, that doesn't work that way, does it?
It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. But you also run into the fact that they see the possibility and they think that there should be some sort of compensation for setting that new owner up for that opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're spending a bunch of time sort of talking about the end of, I guess, sort of a business life cycle, but can you speak at all to sort of the beginning of one? Like if a person is going to try and be responsible and try to be diligent and try and get set up in the right way from the jump, what sorts of things should somebody maybe consider, putting in place early on, that kind of thing? I mean, is it just sort of having an array of advisors, have your tax guy, have your CPA, have your bookkeeper, have, whomever, or are there sort of longer term strategies for, I know that when, after 40 years in this work, I'm going to want to get out. So let's plan from the beginning.
Wow, somebody would plan 40 years in advance. That would be awesome.
That'd be great.
It might be a little too optimistic based on
that would be great.
The numbers.
Just comes with a stack of papers all organized and ready for you.
I've got it figured out.
I'm good to go. It's always, so here's what I tell business owners at the outset, whether they're buying a company or whether they're starting a company. And it's this: at some point, you're not going to own this company anymore. Whether it's because you decide to sell it, you pass it to your employees, you give it to your kids, you shut the door and walk away. I don't know, and they probably don't know. But your goal is to give yourself as many options as possible.
Okay.
So, when you're setting the business up, and that is about value, that is about the operations, that is about, as fast as you can, making yourself not the, profit on the top of the mountain that everything has to run through you, right? There's the elements of scalability and economic independence that go along with all of it. But if you just view it as, at some point, I'm not going to own this company anymore. And if I'm not going to be the one owning it, what are the best things that I can put in place to make sure that I have options when I decide I want to leave? And that could be 40 years from now. That could be 4 years from now.
Sure.
Right. So those are some of the basic stuff is, have systems and processes. Have a separate, make sure you got your bank accounts set up so that they're easy to track the stuff through. Have the right legal documents. Don't kind of try to cut corners everywhere that you can cut corners if you're just going to have to fix it later on.
Yeah, well, that actually reminds me. I think it's E-Myth Revisited, Michael Gerber. I think he talks about the systems and processes in place where if someone, like, for example, in my industry, I'm the one that does everything. If I sell the business, that goes away. So if you're the roadblock and you're trying to sell your business, that kind of poses a problem. So you have to build up the systems and the strategies to be able to have the business function without you. So when you brought that up, I was like, I think that's the book, and I'm probably quoting a totally different one.
And if you're not, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the E-Myth that's very much on that same framework, right? Because the E-Myth is built around the idea that the practitioner starts
something.
Exactly. The pie shop. Yeah. Right. And that you as an expert have gone out and started building a business around your expertise. And so as a result of that, you are often the one doing things in the beginning. And the challenge is, and the opportunity is to not continue to be the one that's doing all of the things.
Sure.
Lots of business owners, if they're not the one performing the duties, are often the face of the business or the primary salesperson.
Sure.
And so that's
family members that are in retail, and that's exactly it. It's his face. And if he walks away, the person that everyone knows and loves, the business is going to go with it. And it really does make a difference. So those are when you have something like that, I mean, you can work around it. The best way, if you've got somebody who's the loved and known personality, is to hire somebody and have them be there for a year as an employee. And whether that person buys the business or whether somebody else buys the business, you've transferred the relationships completely outside of a transition. See, that's something I never even thought about, is the transition for the customer side of things versus the owner side of things, because they're getting a new person, and that could change everything. So that's interesting you brought that up. Yeah.
And there's plenty of businesses where that doesn't matter at all.
Yeah. True.
Right. It doesn't matter at all. And the unfortunate part with smaller businesses is that the owners don't realize that until they're actually in a negotiation with a potential buyer.
Sure.
Like they're all the way in the middle of it. And that's a tough place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose you start making decisions based on wrong factors. You're maybe not, doing the things that might be best in your best interest just to make the deal happen, or, whatever. But I'm sure you're opening yourself up to problems by doing it that way.
You become motivated. You become motivated by getting the sale done, and not maybe what's best for the customers, the business, or things like that. And the reality of it is, when you get into a sale process, you're being surrounded by advisors who really want to get the sale done.
Sure. Right. It's like buying a house, I'm sure.
That's right.
Through the pipeline.
Yep.
Can you actually maybe walk us through a scenario business sale? Like if you were to come in to Joe Schmo's Crab Shack and sell his business, what would you need from him and expect going into the conversation?
So the first thing that we do when we sit with business owners is we try to address some of the things that you guys have already brought up. And that is, realistically, here's what your numbers look like from the purview of you want to sell the company. So before we all invest a lot of time and money and you get your hopes up, let's take a look at the numbers. And really that is, we start with the last 3 years worth of tax returns.
Sure.
There's, one of the things that happens when you say that to people is they'll be like, oh, but there's a lot of stuff that I do for tax purposes that isn't really what happens in the business. And I get that. There's a lot of decisions that we make for taxes. And there are certain tax laws that treat things in business differently than that would look on your financial statements.
Sure.
The challenge is that the banks, when they go to lend somebody money to buy your business, rely on your tax returns. Now, we've had clients who have decided that their best interest is to amend their tax returns, and they've done that.
How hard of a process is that?
It's not hard.
Yeah.
It's not challenging. I mean, it's, it has to be defensible. And some of it is just about, changing your mind about how you've categorized certain items, or, you could have had terrible bookkeeping.
Sure.
And you paid somebody $200 to do your taxes, and you're like, okay, well, I need to clean up all of my books. And when I do that, it may result in an amended tax return.
Is that a red? I know we're trying to avoid the random,
the
vague
tax
comments. Is that a red flag for an audit?
I think there are a number of factors that the IRS looks at in terms of what could flag somebody for an audit. And I think it varies on industry. It varies on what the tax filing history of the taxpayer has been. I had a client that went through an audit, interestingly enough, on the year where they paid the most taxes that they had ever paid.
Weird.
And that was the year that got audited. And we asked what flagged the return for an audit. And for corporate tax returns, there's there's 20 lines of very discrete expenses. And then there's a line that's everything else. And it was the everything else line that flagged them. But you have no choice but to put everything else in that line because it doesn't go in the other line.
Right.
So I don't understand why I'm being audited because I put everything where it belongs. And so it was a very easy audit to get through.
Sure.
But it was that sort of thing. So, I don't think you want to go futzing around with your taxes just for the purposes of a sale, but you may look at some decisions that you've made and taken an aggressive tax position and consult with your tax advisor on, having a different approach if that's an option.
Sure. So why is that well, obviously we kind of did a broad overview of that, but avoiding paying higher tax, it's really just breaking down to if they want to get a loan on it or not. Is it just the hard numbers, or is it the inventory and everything included in the loan?
There's a couple of things. So certainly a lot of banks will loan on collateral, inventory, equipment, things like that. They're still concerned about getting their money on their loan payment.
Sure.
Right. So they need to be able to see that there's enough cash coming off of the business that the business can make the loan payment. Even if it's collateralized, they want to know that you can make the payment because they don't really want to come and take your equipment and sell it.
Yeah, they don't want to deal with that.
They don't really want to deal with that. But if we go back to the tax conversation a little bit, a lot of businesses are focused on, and a lot of tax advisors are focused on minimizing the business taxes. And you can do that. If you're asset heavy, you can do a lot of that through depreciation. Well, depreciation isn't real money. So it doesn't count against you when you go to get a loan,
Interesting.
right? Because you're not writing a
Okay.
check to somebody for your depreciation.
Yeah.
And there are other things related to compensation, right? So incentive compensation that's tied to company results works differently than if you just gave everybody a raise,
Okay.
right? Because
Huh.
if you give everybody a raise, that's what they're going to make. And unless a new owner wants to come in there and give everybody a pay cut,
Then they have
and
that overhead.
then they have that overhead and it's built into the company. If you have bonuses that are based on revenue or gross profit, the more successful the company, the more the employees get paid, but it's being funded by the growth.
Okay. That's tricky. That makes sense.
So you can accomplish the same goal just by doing it a couple of different ways.
So do you think is it better to buy an existing business or build one from the ground up?
There's always pros and cons to everything. The benefit to buying an existing business is that a lot of the foundational work's been done for you. As long as it's a business that you would want to be in, that you have some sort of experience running, right? So I wouldn't recommend somebody go buy a retail store if they haven't at least done a tour of duty through retail or fast food,
a restaurant, and never have been a cook before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things that come with that. The margins are different. The staff turnover is different. The customer management, the advertising, all of those things are completely different than if you go buy a company that is producing something like building, they're making countertops or they make healthcare products or something
Sure.
like that, right? Like that's got a whole different element to it. And the other thing that I would say is that, it's fairly classic for white collar former corporate people to go buy a company because they're used to managing people, but they go buy a company that's almost all laborers.
Sure.
They don't really know how to manage the laborers.
Yeah. A little bit different.
It's a little bit different. And what motivates them isn't what motivates the typical office worker. I have a lot of clients where they have the shop trade labor and they're like, we should get a 401k. And I'm like, they don't care about your 401k. They really don't even care about your health insurance. You know what they want? $1 more an hour.
Yeah. It's crazy. I'm sure you get a really insider look in a lot of different businesses and how they operate just by having to look at their books and go over
Right.
all the revenue. It's incredible.
So we've been talking a little bit about sort of the characteristics, if you're going to sell your own company or something, some of the things you ought to have lined up. Let's sort of flip that a little bit, maybe to Mike's question earlier, and talk a little bit about sort of the due diligence that you need to put in when you're buying one. So like if I was going to step up to some company and rather than be selling my own, I was actually interested in making this purchase, what types of things should I be looking for? And I imagine they're probably similar to what the sale, the person doing the selling probably needs to have in line. But can you speak a little bit to what that process might feel like?
Yeah. So one of the things that is interesting is that when we have worked with buyers, they get really focused, and a lot of our conversation and to this point has been about expenses. And so buyers get really focused on expenses. And they'll ask me, they'll be like, is there anything else I should be looking at? And I'm like, the revenue, like really, these operating expenses, they're sort of just going to happen.
Yeah.
Please don't worry about whether you can reduce the cable bill. Like, I know you can get internet phone service cheaper, but okay, you need to be worried about the revenue. Like, how profitable is the revenue? Where is it going to come from? It's not just going to keep showing up.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's the other side of the coin, right? You've got to have both the income and the output. So
yeah. So I think, one of the things that I see buyers do is I don't think they pay as much attention to what's created that revenue. And it's very interesting because if you actually talk to sellers, they don't really talk about their expenses. I mean, not really. If you sit down with them and start talking to them, what they're focused on and what most long-term business owners manage is customers and revenue.
It's true.
Yeah,
Now,
I suppose that makes sense. Yeah.
You know, some of that's because they just know what their expenses are and they have a run rate. They don't have to worry about it. But some of it is because they know if the customers don't show up, they've got really big problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose even the more sloppy approach is, well, as long as I just keep throwing money at it, you know, the more money I can keep coming in, the better off we're going to be.
That's right. Yeah. So there's definitely that. I mean, a lot of long-term business owners that don't have any debt on their business look at their revenue and their sales and their bank account, and that's how they manage their companies.
Yeah.
And that really, I think, frustrates buyers when they're trying to have a really deep dive conversation with the business owners about, okay, I want to get in there. I want to turn over all the rocks and you know,
there's none to turn over.
Yeah.
There's none to turn over.
Yeah.
And, you know, generally business owners aren't trying to hide stuff. Now, when we go through and do financial due diligence for buyers, you know, we look at internal financial statements, tax returns. We look for things like customer concentration, right? Do you have a customer that makes up 50% of your revenue?
Yeah, problematic if that one bails, all of a sudden you can't pay the loan anymore.
Problematic. Do you have supplier concentration, right? Are you getting, and that's more of a choice thing. There are certain industries that have 3 big suppliers, and that's who everybody gets their stuff
from.
And
I imagine it's kind of a risk mitigation thing, right? Like you're looking at it and you're just trying to say, okay, be aware, 50% of the business comes from this person. Right. You know, maybe that person will bail, maybe they won't, but you know, just be aware. Now, if you as buyer want to go forward, then go forward. But so I imagine that's a big part of it, is just sort of, you know, like you said, flipping over these rocks and just trying to identify the potential risk. And then, you know, I guess based on their tolerance or their pocketbook, they can decide what they want to do.
Yeah. And we look for what I'll call relational patterns in the financial data. So if accounts receivable, let's say you're in a company that has accounts receivable, if accounts receivable has doubled in the last year, then I hope to heck sales did something similar. Because if they didn't, if sales stayed flat and the AR doubled, that's a sign that something else is going on.
Not getting paid.
Right, they're not getting paid.
Yeah, so it's great. You did all this work, just nobody's paying you for it.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit. I noticed here in your bio that you have some experience in venture capital and venture work. I know that one thing that, I don't know, maybe it's TV, social media, whatever, makes it seem like it's super easy to do is just go get money. You want to do a project, and apparently you can just go somewhere to the internet.
Everywhere. People are out there handing out money.
Yeah, everyone just has $1 billion laying around, and they just want to buy your thing. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about not just taking money, but when to. Like maybe what stage you ought to be at before you do that, when not to, what are the reasons to not take somebody's money, and then how to do it the right way. So we've had guests and conversations with people in the past that have sort of talked about, you know, taking money, but from what we've heard from some legal counsel is that a lot of times people aren't even taking money the right way. They're taking it in a way that could ultimately bite them in the butt. So I'm curious about sort of, you know, the venture standpoint, or how it works to work with venture.
You know, in general, if so I will say this, and I know that a lot of money is a relative term depending upon who you are. But generally speaking, the more money that you want, the more likelihood is that you're going to give up control.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? I mean, it's like anything, you know.
It's like anything.
Yeah, I mean, the worse your credit is, the more risk they're taking on you, the higher interest rate you pay, or whatever it is. So I suppose it makes sense.
Yeah, and so, you know, that could be something that you learn in conversations before you ever take the money, which would be great. Or, you know, it's like, so in just like almost everything in life, there's a honeymoon phase. And so you're courting and you get the money, and in the first 6 months, it's fantastic because it's performing exactly as everybody thought it would. And your new 51% owner is leaving you alone. And then in months 7 through 12, the whole thing goes to hell, and your 51% owner wants to come in and start running the company in a way that you don't agree with. And this is your baby. And now you got a big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine that happens a lot, and you're sort of beholden to these
Right.
guys because you've given them your money, these
Right.
venture firms or whatever, and they come in and they say, okay,
Yep.
well,
Yeah.
you needed our money, we gave it to you.
You needed our money,
why you
and here
traded.
was the exchange, and you were fine with that until you weren't fine with that, right? And so, that's one of the challenges. Getting little bits of money from things like angel investors or angel investment groups is, I don't want to say it's not as hard. It's probably as hard. You got to do a lot of talking to a lot of people. You got to kiss a lot of frogs.
Yeah, I've kind of been down that road. I've had to do a couple pitches, and it's not my favorite thing, not my cup of tea.
Yeah, and they don't. I mean, some of them are very focused on certain industries or certain businesses that are in a geography, in tech, or just different things like that. And so that can work a little bit to some folks' advantage. The other thing, though, that I've seen is, and this is the other thing that I've seen, and this is a strong caution, is I've seen venture capitalists tell company founders, okay, we're going to commit to giving you money. There's no agreement, but we want you to do these 3 things first. So these founders go spend money doing all of these things that these venture capitalists are requiring them to do first, and then the money never shows up.
Yeah, that's so.
They never get funded, and those companies go under.
That's so bad.
Yeah, no, I actually have a friend that he's a venture guy himself, but he also has a company right now that's being funded by some venture money. And that was something, I mean, without knowing all the nitty gritty about what went on, basically they'd hired a bunch of people, they did all these things, in preparation for this new money that was coming in. And then the money fell through for one reason or another, cost him $6 million or something. Like, it was this huge mistake, like just huge mistake. And, I mean, luckily he's in a situation he wasn't totally ruined, but for a lot of people, they would have been.
Yeah.
And so it's really scary. And I mean, I guess it's anytime you're, beholden to somebody else, the mob or the venture capitalist, it's kind of the same thing.
And now we've kind of talked about this, assuming that somebody is going to take an ownership part of your company, right? They're going to have a stake in it, so they're going to have a say. And they may not. There's types of ownership that don't result in them having actual management control. So there's options there. But you can get debt venture capital, right? You don't have to get debt from a bank. So there are also options where it's more like not a traditional loan. You're probably going to pay a higher interest rate. It's probably going to have a little bit different terms, but now you're making a loan payment instead of having somebody messing around in the middle of your company.
Makes
right.
100%
well, and I suppose too, it varies a little bit probably on the business too. I mean, if you happen to be, I don't know, you've struck gold, you're going to be one of these unicorns and you found something that's just the perfect thing for the market. I suppose you might have a little more leverage in a discussion for venture versus, you're just trying to get the startup going. You believe in it, but it's not proven in the market yet. And you just need some money to keep it moving.
Yeah.
I suppose, depending on your situation as the founder, it may affect your relationship as well, or affect how involved the venture group might be.
Yeah, I think if you're starting a company, and I live in Kansas City, so we have a lot of these types of organizations around here, and I'm sure I know other cities do as well. But there's a lot of incubators and accelerators and programs like that are designed to not only kind of help you get some of the foundational pieces in place, but the swan song out of the program is a pitch, right? And those programs are bringing all those investors in there, and so it's a little bit more articulated and choreographed than you trying to go out and find these venture capitalists on your own.
So I actually went through a process like this, and I paid like $3,000, right around there, just to go and help them craft my idea, come up with the financials, and I think I got swindled, to be honest with you. I'm not going to say the name because they're local and you don't want to go there, but it almost seemed like that once they had the pitch out of the way, it almost felt like it was more of their couple friends who might have money, but here, come sit down and talk and pitch. Now you're out of their hair and you don't have to deal with it anymore. And I kind of still have a bad taste on my mouth about that, but
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah, I mean, in Kansas City, we have ones that are actually backed by larger corporations. So if as a startup business owner, you're considering something like that, I would definitely vet them, just like you would anything else.
Sure.
I don't know when you went through it. I'm confident that the people in Kansas City who went through something like this 10 years ago had a vastly different experience than the people who are going through the accelerators now.
Sure.
I suppose too, just with the popularity of sort of entrepreneur culture and everything else like that, I suppose you're going to get good and bad too. You're going to get people who are, maybe they're not swindlers, but maybe they're just not good at their job, or maybe they don't have the right connections, or they don't have the right whatevers. And so,
I mean, I'm aware of at least one organization that part of what you agreed to when you got in the program was that you gave them 5% equity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We got that on the table. Like, we were talking about that, but it was just a really bad experience all in all. I'm looking at your website right now, and it's peakadvisory.com, PEEK, and going over your services pages, and I see something that I have never heard of before, called financial autopsies.
Yeah.
How do they work, and what does that involve?
It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? It
sounds
sounds
like kill you and take all your money.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, this is new. Let's go down this one.
Yeah. So there's a lot. I will tell you that for the most part, we do these when we have companies that are on some sort of growth trajectory and are having cash flow problems.
Okay.
And think they shouldn't be because they're growing so quickly and they don't understand where the money is. So there's a couple of drivers behind this. The first and foremost, growth takes cash. And I think, depending upon the type of business that you're in, it could take more cash than you think it should.
Oh yeah. I've learned that one the hard way a few times.
Yeah. So some of it is just the business owner doesn't understand what their cash conversion cycle is, right? So from the moment that the first penny goes out the door on a particular product or service to when you get paid for the work that you've done, how long does that take?
Sure.
So some of it's that. Some of it is not understanding that you've set up certain payment terms for your customers.
And they don't apply by them. They never follow.
And I know, I don't even understand
what
that.
What the heck?
Right? We have all these terms over here, and then I've got to pay all these vendors, and I got to make payroll.
Right?
Yeah. It's the making of the payroll that is the most painful cash problem that most companies have, and what will get them into more of a financial autopsy mode. So a lot of times it's related to that. We've had clients where I said, it's a specific type of service. You're offering your customers these extended payment plans with no money down and no credit checks.
Yeah.
And I could buy it's harder for me to go buy a $500 refrigerator than it is to get your thing over here.
It always boggles my mind when people come in and say, for example, you have an event coming up and you got food vendors that are supposed to come and provide the food for you. And then, you didn't have a contract. So we're just going to wash our hands of them because the event's not making enough money. So we don't need that food vendor anymore. But they don't think that the food vendor just bought all the food and supplies and everything that they need to do your event. And then you're just kicking them to the curb. And now they're stuck on that product, that material. And it's in every service business. The behind the scenes expenses that get involved into stuff like that, renting equipment, doing this, doing that need to be paid. And then the client takes 4 months to pay you. And it just makes zero sense to me. And I honestly think I'm going to switch my business model to payment up front or you don't get service at all, because it's,
it is. And there's depending upon, again, what type of product or service you're providing and what kind of the risk associated with that payment is. get the money up front. And it's interesting to me because a lot of the pushback that I get from companies is, well, that's just not the industry norm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can ride that industry norm out of business just like all the other people, or you can
in
get
my
the money.
opinion, it's industry standard now because it's getting to the point where it's borderline ridiculous. You think you can trust people, and they just screw you over, and it's really kind of frustrating. So.
Yeah, and so the other thing is that I think I think there's a lack of understanding sometimes about how. I mean, everybody, like, let's say that you rent your office space and the rent's due on the first of the month. And for whatever reason, you've timed your payroll, so it's always due on the first of the month.
Yeah.
And you can think about how it should all average out, but we all know it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that in your personal life. It doesn't work like that in your business either. So, some of the other stuff that we look for in that process is, how can you make your outgo match your inflow as much as possible? The more those are in sync, the easier your life is, because you're not sitting around doing math all day.
Yeah, that's very true. I guess we're kind of getting up on that time frame. Is there any parting shots you'd like to go over, or places people can find you?
Well, you mentioned our website, and that is an excellent place to find us. We have a number of articles on there. We have, if you scroll down a little bit on the homepage, we have a quiz that's free that folks can take. It'll give them a sense of kind of where they stand from a business value perspective. There's a report that comes with that can be helpful. And really, it includes not just here's what you're doing right or wrong. It also says, here's some stuff that you could look at doing otherwise.
So you're mainly looking for people, or you're in the acquisition and selling side of things. So if you have a business you're trying to sell, you're the person to hit up.
Yep. Okay. We can definitely help with all of that. We also work with companies that are like, I'm not going to sell right now, but I want to get an idea of what it's worth.
Sure.
And then we refresh that valuation on an annual basis.
Well, and I suppose having an understanding of your valuation sort of throughout the lifetime of a business,
that's right,
might help you when borrowing money or whatever, if you need to go to the bank to buy a big piece of equipment or something, having some understanding of where your business is, so you can go to your banker and say, well, look, this will be no problem to pay for this because look at our numbers, that kind of thing. So, so I imagine it's not something that should always be held off until the end.
Yeah. And we've had, some of our other clients have said, I've had a couple of people just casually make a comment about maybe wanting to buy us. And if that were to happen, I kind of want to know where I stand, right? I don't want to wait until somebody gives me an offer before I react to it. I want to,
because it may sound like a lot of money. You might go, holy crap, you want to give me what? And then you talk to, somebody like you and find out that your business is worth half of what they offer.
Right. And then you're like, or double.
Yeah,
either
or double
way.
what they offered. Yeah. And so it makes sense to just have, I think it's probably sound advice anyway, that you should have some kind of mastery over your numbers anyway. And so, but it makes sense also just as an extension of that to have an understanding of your company's valuation. So it makes sense to me anyway. So cool. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming on the show. We really appreciate your time. I think this was great information. I think a lot of people will enjoy it. Once again, the website is peakadvisory.com. Give her a shout. I'm not sure though. Are you Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas?
So look at you. Are you a
Chiefs fan or aren't you?
Uh-huh.
Well, I think you're a Chiefs fan, even if you're on the Kansas side. I'm on the Missouri side.
Okay. So we'll let you slide. So, so great. So cool. So yeah, reach out to Jennifer. We'll make sure all her contact information and everything is on the website. And when this goes out, we'll have all that information available. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in and watched the video and downloads the show, everything else. If you have questions for Jennifer or anybody on the show, send us a note, info@eggscast.com, or go to the show, go to the website, eggscast.com, and fill out the form. So cool. Jennifer, thanks so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so just so you're aware, Jennifer, this podcast will run, I think, not this coming Thursday or the next, but the week after that. So you'll be about 3 weeks out.
Great.
I will send you album artwork and a little, some information and links and stuff that you're welcome to distribute once it hits.
Perfect.
So we'll be in touch again around that time.
All right, sounds great.
All right, thanks so much,
Right.
Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.